All right. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for sticking around, even though this one's going to be recorded. I'm grateful that you guys are here. Just so I know, are you using both cameras? Is there one I should look at? That one. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful for me to know. Just to know where to look if I'm talking to the crowd out there somewhere. So hello if you're watching later. So we're going to talk today about worship and culture. What do they have to do with one another? And a lot of that work is grounded in a work done by the Lutheran World Federation, right? We're a part of the Lutheran World Federation, the ELCA is, and it's kind of what holds global Lutheranism together. It's based out of Geneva, Switzerland, and they kind of have an office building right across the way from the UN, actually. And so they come up with different things that they're working on together from time to time, and they were doing an exploration on the relationship between worship and culture, and it kind of culminated in this statement at a meeting in Nairobi, Kenya in 1996. And so it's called the Nairobi Statement on Worship and Culture, because that's where the meeting was in 1996, where they kind of came to the end and made this formal statement and adopted it as, this is the way that we want to think about the relationship between worship and culture. Now, before we jump into that, culture is maybe needing some definition. What is culture? How do we define culture? If we're going to talk about the relationship between worship and culture, what is culture? And there's many different ways to define it. My favorite definition of culture kind of looks like this. This is water. This is an iceberg, right, floating in the water. If you've done any kind of cultural workshops or whatever, you've probably seen this image before. I should probably turn this so you all can see it. There we go. So culture, there's a lot of stuff that's at the tip of the culture that's really easy to see, that's really accessible, that you notice right away. So up here, you might, see things like food, clothes. You might see music up here, things that are very surface level, which are great. I mean, when you're traveling, those are the things you see right away, right? You see the music, you see the clothes, you see the music, hear the music, the dancing. That's the stuff at the tip of the iceberg. But that's not the stuff, most of the stuff that is culture is down here. And so one of the ways that I think about culture, it's like your internal meaning-making mechanism, right? Your culture defines for you what is good, what is bad, what is appropriate or not, what's helpful or not, how you eat. And so, like, for example, I have a friend from India. And when she grew up eating, she was never allowed to eat with her left hand. You always eat with your right hand. You only ever eat with your right hand. You never even think about using your left hand, right? Why? Because your right hand's the hand that you keep clean, and your left hand's the one that you do all of your dirty work with, right? Because in that culture, you don't use paper for going to the toilet. There's usually like a teapot type looking thing right next to the toilet, and you use water and you clean yourself with that. And then maybe there's a towel to dry yourself off afterwards, right? So this is the hand that you clean yourself with all the time. So you don't use this hand for eating, you use this one. Right? And so every time she sat down to eat, you ate with your right hand. If you reach out with your left hand as a little kick, chin now. No, that's not how you eat, right? And like in that culture, if somebody gets caught stealing or something like that, like this is not currently, but long ago, the punishment for the crime, they took off your right hand. You had to do everything with your left hand, including the dirty business, right? And so in that culture, if they see us eating barbecue with both hands, ugh. Right? They look at you and they think, these people are dirty. What are they doing? Like, where's their modesty? Where's it all gone? Right? They might look at us and think, well, they not care about hygiene? That's what their meaning-making mechanism does. Now, the opposite is true, right? Like, in what's modest and what's not. Like, if we use the same example, the traditional garb that somebody might wear in India, a sari. Anybody seen a sari? What part does it not cover? Your stomach, your midriff. But, in general American culture, most people see an open midriff, they go, right? Like, hey, cover up, pull that shirt down, or pull those pants up, or, why is this showing? Although that's a newer trend that's coming back right now, and some people are like, right? Why is that coming back, right? That's the meaning-making mechanism for you. And so maybe if you saw somebody wearing a sari, you might go, they're showing their midriff. But that's all informed by some stuff that's down here, about how you've been formed, what's modesty, what matters, what parts of your body can you show or not show. For example, like me, right now, I'm wearing jeans. For some people, when they see a pastor wearing jeans, they go, a bishop wearing jeans? Really? I was a pastor early on, and I started wearing jeans, and somebody came up to me and was like, are you making a statement against the system? I was like, I am the system. What are you talking about? And for them, right, for me to wear jeans and wear tennis shoes on Sunday was somehow, against what they had a mental image of who is a pastor, what they do, what they uphold, right? And that was coming from a whole bunch of stuff that's down here, right? So that's culture, right? The stuff that you learn when you're a kid and you keep learning for the rest of your life, the way that the stuff that informs how you engage and make meaning of the world, right? So, all right, that's a really important thing, just at least as a baseline, right? It's our meaning-making mechanism. So, then what is the relationship between that and culture? First, worship, right? What is worship? Anybody? What is worship? If you were going to explain to somebody like, this is worship, and they don't know what it is. Anybody, how would you explain to somebody what is worship? A community gathering, what was that? Giving glory to God. Yeah? All right, I'll give you the official answer. This is the official church answer. It's where the word and sacraments are rightly distributed in community, right? So you've got word, you got sacrament, you got community. That's worship. So together, you guys got it, right? That's what worship is. Okay, so when we're talking about worship and culture, right, culture is going to be really important because community is a part of it. And so how do we make meaning of all of the things that are going on when we gather together? And how does that speak into our culture, right? And so I was at a church a couple weeks ago, was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, right before Christmas. And their culture, I didn't know this, but when they pass the peace, every single person in the room shares the peace with every single person in the room. And so I had to learn this about their culture before I got started. So somebody pulled me aside, hey, Bishop, just so you're ready, this is what we do. Everybody, when we share the peace, is going to stand up. You go to the center aisle, and it's like, at the end of a game or something, you just go down the line, and everybody says hello to everybody, and you got that one person in the room who hugs everybody else, right? And that's part of their culture, right? And it makes sense for them. This is part of their culture, and this is how they demonstrate God's love for one another, that God's love doesn't skip out on anyone in the room. Now, you can opt out, you could stay sitting if you want, but this is what they do. This is part of their culture. And you have to learn what is my culture, what is broader culture, how do we work with cross cultures, are there things that are beyond culture? Those are the types of questions that the Nairobi Statement on Worship Culture tries to think about. So, all right, we're going to move into that now. What is this Nairobi Statement on Worship and Culture? They end up with 4 key relationships between worship and culture. All right, so transcultural, Trans meaning beyond, right? Beyond culture. So one of the key relationships for them that comes up in this document is that worship is beyond culture. That there's just some things about worship that go beyond any particular place or time, that actually do the work of holding us all together. All people who have worshiped God from the time the first person worshiped to the last time somebody worships, that holds us all together. So another key word I think about there is one, right? There's one worship that just has not changed. So there's this great example from this man called Justin. He was a martyr in the very early church, and he's got this little description of what their worship was like. And he says, the community all gathered together. We read the scriptures, and somebody who was learned expanded on those scriptures. We gathered together our extra money and funds, and we distribute it to the poor, and then we gather together around the Lord's table with bread and wine before being sent out into the world to do God's work. Does that sound familiar? Right? And we're talking 2,000 years ago. So there's a pattern to worship that is the same and just has not changed. We call it in the Lutheran world, it's word gathering, word, meal, sending. That's our general pattern. That doesn't really change. Anytime you worship together, you gather together, you share in God's word, you celebrate the meal, and then you are sent out into the world, right? That doesn't change. You might say those aspects of worship that you could go anywhere in the world and just know, like the Lord's Prayer, right? The Lord's Prayer is said in every single language of the world, and you can go to any church anywhere, and at some point, they're probably gonna say the Lord's Prayer, and you're gonna know, because it's got a similar cadence even. And so even, I don't know if anybody's had an experience of worshiping outside of your own language, but you'll just know, like, oh, the Lord's Prayer is happening, right? And all of a sudden you'll realize, like, I know this, right? Or when you go up and you get communion, you may not know the language, you may even be different type of bread, a different type of wine, you might be kneeling, you might be gathering around a small altar, you might be passing by, you might be doing it in your pew, you might be at home in your PJs, right? That's what we learned over the pandemic. But the communion is communion. It hasn't changed. So there are some things that hold us together beyond worship, beyond culture, beyond space, beyond time. So transculture. Now here's the tricky thing. This, it never exists, really. Because we don't do things without any cultural tones set to it, right? As soon as something takes on a language, it's been culturalized, right? You're saying it in English or in Spanish or in Japanese or in Arabic, right? Or as soon as you do communion, you're using a particular type of bread or a particular type of shape, a particular type of form. As soon as you step into a building, you have a building, and the culture is already impacting what you're doing with worship. So this is kind of an intellectual exercise, because it never actually exists. Because, just like God, God is incarnate, right? God comes into the world, and so worship also happens in the world. And so this is maybe one that we think about. Think about what are maybe the major pieces of worship that hold us all together. But then, immediately, we have to say that worship is contextual. It takes place in a particular place and time, always. You just can't get around that, right? And so while there are pieces of worship that might hold us all together, it always takes a particular shape, right here and right now. You're going to be singing in a particular language. You might be using the piano, or you may have a band, or you might have an organ. And all of those things are cultural, and they have different meanings. Now, the piece with contextual that they like to lift up is that it's important for a community to be able to recognize worship as their own, that there are pieces that this feels like me, right? This feels like my community. This is distinctive to who I am, and it impacts me in a particular way, right? Because it's speaking to my culture. And so this is kind of the first work of the church, is saying, okay, What's the stuff that we all do in common? And now how do we make sure that it's speaking to us here and now? Part of the question that I've been starting to ask congregations is your context today or is it 50 years ago? Right? Because sometimes we forget that the church 50 years ago was doing this work. They were figuring out, how do we make this alive today with our culture so it speaks to our people? It's not this. It's not transcultural. The way the church worshiped 50 years ago is not transcultural, right? Having a Norwegian dinner is not transcultural. It's very particular to a place and to a time, right? The singing German hymns was particular because there was German communities that came over and they wanted to sing their German hymns, right? They had organs that they brought with them, so there was organ music. That was not the transcultural thing. That was a contextual thing. And I was doing research recently because I was teaching a class on early church history, and it was interesting right around the time, like you have First English Lutheran Church in La Crosse. They're English because they were the first ones to be doing worship in English. Well, the battles that happened right before that, right? They thought, oh, these people, they're doing away with the traditions. They're doing away with our values. But at the same time, there was a group of people in the church saying, we're losing the young people. The young people are not coming here anymore. They're going somewhere else. They can find community elsewhere. They can find friends elsewhere. And if we keep just doing the worship in Swedish or Norwegian or German or whatever, we're going to lose our young people. We're not speaking their language. We have to change. And there was this fight happening back and forth. Is this even allowable? How could we possibly let go of this tradition? And they had to figure out, oh, wait, those languages, those modes of worship were not up here. They were here for a different place and time. And the times had changed. And so they said, in order to be contextual again, we got to start doing worship in English. And maybe we do have to bring a piano in, maybe a drum, and maybe Sunday school has to change, and we have to start doing things differently to speak to this particular place and time. And not pretend like whatever the thing was is up here. So you have to do a little bit of discerning. Is it actually transcultural, or are you just, holding up a sacred calf on something? And there's lots of little things that are like that. Like when we do communion, you know how you put a white cloth over the wine and the bread? Those are just to keep away flies. That's all they are. Right? Because you would think, a while ago, these buildings were big, they were cavernous, there was flies all over the place, and they did not want flies flying in to the wine, so they put a cloth over it. 500 years later, we're still putting that cloth because we designated the cloth up here instead of being down here. Okay, so we need to figure out what is our culture today, what matters to us today. And so as you're on this journey figuring out what does it mean for us to be a welcoming community, you need to look around and say, well, what's actually, the stuff that's core? What matters to who we are as Christians? Not just to me, but forever. What is, the non-negotiables? That's this stuff. And then figure out how do we make sure that we're contextualizing for today, and not that it's contextualized to some other time for some other people in another place in another time that we're still holding on to. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. So then here's the thing. We do want to be in conversation with our own worship, with our own culture. We want to make sure that our culture infuses who we are in worship. But not every part of our culture should be in our worship, right? Not every part of our culture is good. And so there are times where we need to speak out against culture. So while we want to be contextual, we also want to be countercultural. So in worship, we have to actively speak out against those aspects of our current culture that prevent us from being in right relationship with God, that prevent us from being in right relationship with our siblings, that prevent us from being in right relationship with creation all around us, that prevent us from even being in right relationship with ourselves sometimes. And so we have to have a very close eye to say, okay, we want to make sure we're speaking in our culture, in our language, in our time, in our context. But not every aspect of our current culture is helpful. So there's parts of worship that do this work of actively speaking against. So like the peace that was shared a couple weeks ago in that church where we all got out and everyone shared the peace with every single other person. Could you imagine that happening on Capitol Hill? Right? To say, everybody get out of your seat, everybody greet the other person, and say, hey, God loves you, and you are my sibling. How countercultural is that? Right? That we have a place where we get together with a whole bunch of people that we may or may not know, and we say, I'm going to shake your hand. I'm going to say, God loves you. The spirit within me greets the spirit within you. We're going to connect, and I don't have to know anything about you. That's countercultural, especially right now, right? That's amazing. And that you have to think about that, very particularly. How do you do that welcome? What other parts of worship might be countercultural? You might think about the hymns that we sing, and what are the words that you're saying within that. One of my favorite examples is Mary's song, the Magnificat, which my favorite version is, what's it called, the Canticle of the Turning. Let's see, what number is that? 723. You know that the Canticle of the Turning, not that song, but the Magnificat, Mary's song, was actually outlawed during the Third Reich in Germany because the words were so countercultural. They were speaking out against those in power, right? So Mary's song that says, let the king be aware, for your justice tears every tyrant from his throne. Right? That's impactful stuff. It's very impactful stuff. And we do that in worship. My other favorite little example comes from South America. Vamos todos al banquete. Let us go now to the banquet. And it's this song that was written by Guillermo Cuellar in El Salvador right after Vatican II happened. And so the Catholics started to use native languages because of that. And so they were doing their own folk mass. And it was in the time where there was civil war, people were fighting against each other. The military was going after indigenous people and poor people. Priests were getting killed. And in the midst of that, the Archbishop Oscar Romero asked one of the kids from his youth group to write a folk mass that would speak to the people. And so he writes this folk mass, and the very first time that it's being done in worship, Oscar Romero is presiding over the sacrament, and he gets assassinated right at the altar because of the words of this new mass that they were doing, and also because of the advocacy of Oscar Romero, who was saying God's love is for everyone, not just for the few, not just for the powerful, but literally for everyone. And so this song, hold on to that. So part of it, it says, God invites all the poor and hungry to the banquet of justice and good, where their harvest will not be hoarded, so that no one will lack for food. May we build such a place among us where all people are equal in love. God has called us to work together and to share everything we have. And for those in the know, you're hearing through those words a bit of communism, because at that time in South America, the theology was starting to blend with a little bit of communist ideology, and they were talking about making a world where there is enough for everyone, where there's a place for everyone, and that was very much against the dictator at that time. And so the church is calling out for a place where everyone has something to eat, and so it's directly speaking against the culture, right? And that's the work of the church sometimes, to speak against. against the culture. And the refrain is, vamos todos al banquete, let's all go to the banquet, a la mesa de la creación, to the table of all creation. Cada cual con su taburete, each one with their little workman's stool, tiene un puesto y una misión, has their place and has a mission, right? And so saying that at the table, at this, right, this table, there's a place for every single person. Everyone has a place. Everyone has a reason for being there. Everyone has a mission, right? And so saying that was very countercultural. And so we need to be actively thinking about our worship today. Where are we speaking out against culture? What are the pieces of culture today that we need to actively think, how do we speak out against that in our worship? Through our songs, through the way we gather together, through what we sing, through what we do, through the way that we pray, what are we praying about, through preaching, through the teaching, right? And we think about how do we speak against culture, not just taking everything in. Now, this is a little bit of a trap, because you could be doing all of these three things, thinking about what holds all of worship together, the kind of the mental exercise of what is core, how do we make that contextual within our culture, how do we speak out against our culture, right? So this is all about me so far. And so you can get trapped in this triangle and feel like you're doing a really great job, right? You can get trapped in thinking about how do we think about me and us and our people. And so they lift up a fourth one, which is really crucial, that worship always has to be cross-cultural. Cross-cultural. And so that you always have to bring in voices from the outside. You have to bring in God's gifts that are being shown, displayed in cultures outside of your own. And part of the reason for that is that in worship is where we create our communal image of who God is, right? And so the way we worship, the way we pray, the way we sing, whether you stand up or sit down at a certain time, or if you pray spontaneously, or if you always have to read things out of a line, all of that says something about who God is, right? And so if you have only ever worshiped in a very kind of German style, where you sing German hymns, you stand up and you sit down at certain times, everything is scripted, you might get this mental image of a strong God, right? Because the organ is strong and it's steady and it never loses breath and it's measured, right? Because everything is pre-written. You might get a sense for God who doesn't change because you do the same liturgy every single Sunday, and those are all fine, right? But that's not all of who God is, because over here, you might have an experience of worship where you're praying spontaneously and things really aren't scripted out, where you're singing hymns with a little bit of rhythm and movement, where when you pass the peace, everybody's kissing and hugging each other, right? And so your mental image of who God is might say, well, God is spontaneous, and God moves around, and God is relatable, right? Those are vastly different images of who God is. Neither one of them are complete, right? And so the reason that we have to do this work of cross-cultural is so that we can keep on expanding our image of who God is. As we sing in different forms, as we pray in different forms, as we gather in different ways, we need to think about how are we together constructing this communal image of who God is, and is that image for everyone? And how do we do the work of making sure that we're bringing in those other voices? So there's resources for you. I mean, this book actually was a huge attempt at getting at this, right? There's music in here from literally all around the world, and that's on purpose. There's a liturgy in here that's a little bit a Latin feeling, Caribbean feeling. There's a one in here that's a little bit more gospel feeling. There's one in here that's a little bit more studied and measured, and there's a few of the, the ones that carried over from the LBW. So it tries to expand those images of who God is. And then there's a new hymnal, the purple one, All Creation Sings, that came out a couple years ago, that even tries to expand a little bit further. There's an actually bilingual setting in there. There's a setting that is meant to be done at night that tries to capture some dark imagery around God so that we're not always talking about God as light, but that God is present in darkness too, and claiming the beauty of darkness, which is important for us to do in the context of worship, right? And there's more music from all around the world. And I'm sure they have access to it online, even though you don't have the physical new hymnal. They've got it all on Sundays and Seasons, so I'm sure they're capable of finding that stuff. And if you guys want an intro to that new hymnal, you can ask me to come by and be happy to help you guys out, because I was part of the hymn selection committee for that new hymnal. So those are the four big things, right? So worship beyond culture, which is the one culture that holds us all together. Then making sure it's contextual here, now, today, but not everything about here now today, because sometimes we got to push back and be countercultural, and then always having in mind that we're not the only culture, right? That there are other cultures outside of our own that we can learn from and grow from and be able to get a fuller image of who God is when we engage cross-culturally. All right, I'm going to stop there. I've been talking for a while, and that's a lot to take in, because I just recently did a class on this, and so it was 7 hours of class. Trying to digest it into one is a lot. So, thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? Yes. Oh, hold on. We want to do this to make sure it's on the recording. There we go.
Just curious, you said parts of that purple hymnal included worshiping God as using dark imagery. I don't understand that. If you could, just like the 1 minute explanation of what that means.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. So one of the things, the reason that particular setting came out is two-faceted. One, a lot of people were doing worship in the evening, Lenten evening stuff or Advent evening stuff, and they were using like holding evening prayer, but then just putting communing in the middle of it. Which is not meant to do that, right? That it's not constructed to have communion as a part of it. So the ELCA really didn't have an evening worship service with communion. So part of it was, let's make an evening worship service that's meant to have communion. So that's kind of constructed the right way. So that's part of it. The other part of it is there's been a need to expand the language that we use for God, because the image of white, pure, bright, light, always being good, right, is not necessarily helpful for us, because how we identify God and our mental image of God informs how we behave in the world. And so if your mind has always been trained to see light, white, pure, right, together, then you might see darkness, blackness as not good, as other, right? And that interferes into how you see people, right? And so how can we do a job as church of seeing darkness, of seeing blackness as something that's good, something to be reclaimed again, so that we can train our minds to have a visual image of who God is that includes darkness, so then we can include good in the dark skin of dark-skinned peoples, right? That's where we're trying to go with it, is that as we're worshiping together, we're creating mental images in our mind that impact how you see and treat people. And so we need to expand, not just white good, light good, we need to expand of, dark good, right? And so thinking about, it uses some creation language that's helpful, like how things are created in darkness, how the womb is dark, right? And life grows from there, and how seeds grow in the soil where it is dark, right? And reclaiming some of that image so that we can not always equate light, white with good, and then darkness with bad, evil. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions, comments? Yeah.
As I said, I'm not sure how to ask this, but as cultures change, I mean, how long do we hold on to our culture or our heritage? as things continue to change. People of color, people of Hispanic backgrounds. If there's well, the example you used was the Norwegian language and English Lutheran. At what point do our generations change our cultural aspects?
Yeah. So how long do you keep pulling back from your history, right? And how much influence does it have on today? That's a tough question. I would say, right now, I'm in the process of writing this chapter in a book right now. And one of the ideas that I'm working with is that my history matters, right? Because it's distinctive to who I am. It informs how I see and view the world. It tells you, like our previous presenter said, tells you a little bit about how I grew up and how that's different or distinct. And so I've been in the position in ministry settings where somebody's come up to me and said, but I don't see you as Puerto Rican. I don't see you as somebody brown. I don't see you as different from me, which comes from a good place. I get it. Comes from a good place. Like they're trying to say, I don't see you as other, I see you as one of us, which comes from a good place. But when you do that, you're not seeing me, right? You're erasing who I am. You're whitewashing me. And so that's not helpful. You need to be able to see distinctiveness. And so something that's helpful and something that's necessary for congregations to do is to figure out, what is your culture? Because one of the things that happens with primarily white communities is they think they have no culture. But you do. And so you need to go through some of the work of asking, how do we do things? And then why is it that we do them that way? Why is it important to us that we do it that way? Now, sometimes you have a quick, easy answer, like this is why, this is how, and this is what it means to me. Sometimes you think, I have no idea why we do it that way. And if you don't have any idea, I think that's the opportunity to ask the question you're asking. If we don't have any idea about why we're doing a thing or holding on to it, then we need to figure out why it was, maybe, and then maybe reclaim it, say, oh, there was a reason for this. Maybe we need to reclaim it. Or say, oh, that's why it was happening? Maybe we can let that go. Maybe we don't need to do that anymore, because sometimes you just hold on to things without knowing. So I think part of it is figuring out, what is your culture? Why does it matter to you? And then asking the question, do we need to hold on to that? And that's going to be a constant process of discernment. I mean, I don't know that you can say, well, we've been doing that for 50 years, so it's time to let it go. I don't know. I don't know if you can say that. But certainly ask yourself, is it important for us to hold on to this? Like around the country, a lot of cities are starting to learn about what it means to be a sundown town right now. So if you're not familiar with a sundown town, okay, so there are many cities throughout the United States that were sundown towns. So they're a sundown town. Some still do this. They ring the bell for the whole city to hear at sundown. And some people just think, okay, it's just a bell to mark the end of the day. No, it's not. It was a bell designating that some of those cities actually passed laws that people of color could not be in that city after sundown. And so they rang the bell, and if their bell was rung and somebody of color was spotted in that town, they ended up in jail or worse. And so some cities are figuring that out now, right? Because it was just like, oh, it's just what we always have done, right? And so that's when you go back and you figure out, oh, we rang that bell because we wanted to do harm to our siblings. Maybe we better stop ringing that bell at sundown. But then you get into cultural fights because people say, no, we've been ringing this bell for 50 years. It's how we mark the end of the day. But they don't know the history, and then you got to do some of the education, right? To say like, well, but if we're ever going to be welcoming to people of color, that bell is a constant reminder that lots of people probably died in this city after that bell rang. So, things like that. Other questions, thoughts, comments? Me, I'm Puerto Rican. I was born in Puerto Rico. My family moved from Puerto Rico to Chicago the summer after first grade for me. So I was pretty young, but that's when I started learning English, was then. Can't tell anymore, but except for one thing, a CH. For whatever reason, CHs sometimes come like SHs. So I was doing a wedding once, and I said to the wedding, to love and cherish, and they looked at me like, cherish? I'm like, oh, sorry, cherish. Every once in a while it comes out, or I'll say chocolate instead of chocolate.
So my foundation, as you said, like the Lord's Prayer is always there. But for me, as we get older, we're able to remember the old hymns.
Mm-hmm.
My heart says, and bringing me in your background, but I am open to new contextual and counter-contextual culture. But my fear is that when you age, like I am aging, and you can't remember, well, we'll always sing Silent Night, but some of those precious hymns, I just don't see the foundation that our culture will have if they don't have that common, it was so repetitive for us to sing on Epiphany such and such day and at Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
I fear for that loss because as you get older, you give some of your mentality up somehow. But it seems like that music is such a foundation for us.
Mm-hmm.
Even when it comes to holy, 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 or whatever you're singing, and I like the difference, and I understand we need that for the culture, and bringing people in, but I fear for what they're going to remember in the golden days.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer.
Yeah. Well, and I think oh, sorry. Yes. Okay. The question over here for those maybe listening later was, what about those tried and true hymns, for example, that we've been singing for however many years that you know and love? If we keep on being contextual, will there be some loss to some of those things that have been held on to for so long? Like, will a next generation not have a holy, holy, holy? Which I would say, traditions change, traditions grow. I think, though, there is a balance. There's a balance. Because one of the things that he mentioned up there is, how do you provide welcome for our older members? And one of the things that's been happening lately in worship circles is thinking about, how do we craft a worship that is intentionally safe for people who have dementia or Alzheimer's? So making sure that you have a holy, 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 right? I mean, I know that it's amazing, you do end-of-life ministry with people, and I went to somebody's home. They hadn't spoken at all for a week. We knew that he was about to pass, so I went, and he was a member of the choir, so the whole choir came. We went to his house, we sang some hymns, and then we had communion together. And one of the things that he always did was he sang the Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. He was the one who always sang that. And so as a part of our little communion liturgy, I sang it, and his eyes opened up and he sang it with me. And he died the next day. I mean, so there's something about that. Those deeply rooted, important parts of worship for you, those are important. And so, yes, I want to say yes to both. So you have to be doing some discernment, and just because it's old doesn't mean it's not contextual, right? That's still a part of our culture today. I think singing Amazing Grace is still important today and making sure that people know it. And we add onto culture. I mean, I would imagine that for those who have been worshiping in places that do contemporary music, there are certain songs that they will know forever, that will just be stuck in their minds forever too. So it'll just be a different catalog. Yeah, so just a new catalog. One of my worship colleagues, we said, each congregation probably has a repertoire of 30 to 50 songs, and that's maybe what you should keep it to, right? So that it's stuff that it's enough to be varied, but it's stuff that you can internalize. I did ministry down in Austin, Texas, and a lot of the guys who were at the church were also military connected. One of them, he did research on POWs in, was it Vietnam? Yeah, POWs in Vietnam. And he said one of the biggest game changers for those who fared well mentally versus those who really were impacted by that POW experience was those who were a part of liturgical church backgrounds. Because those who were a part of liturgical church backgrounds, they had a pattern that they knew. They knew gathering, word, meal, sending. They had a confession and forgiveness that they had memorized. They had the Lord's Prayer memorized. They had the creed memorized. They could run through a worship service, and they did that. While they were stuck as prisoners of war, they would just go through the liturgy, and it gave them an anchor in their minds, and they fared better than those who didn't have that anchor. So I'm not saying everything needs to be cast away, right? So that's why it's so important to figure out what is this oneness of worship that really matters. Like for us, we might say the liturgy. Now, the liturgy might take different contextual forms, but if the liturgy is always the liturgy, it's still the liturgy. You know, you might know, okay, we're gathering right now. Okay, we're praying right now. Okay, this is a sermon right now. And you figure out what are the anchors that are non-negotiable, and then how do we make that relevant today? Yes. Hold on. I want to make sure to do this so people can hear you on the recording.
How does what Mr. Baling talked about previously, the LBGQTA population, how does that tie into our services and our worship?
Yeah.
Or how do we integrate that?
Right, so you might be thinking about perhaps language. How do you talk about God, right? Do you always talk about in male language? Maybe make sure to also talk about God in female language, or maybe non-gendered language. Talk about God as they, as it does in Genesis 1, right? Talks about God as we or they. So language matters. Who's getting represented? You might think about who is leading, right? And so is it only ever straight people? Are queer people leading as well? Are there people of color leading as well? Are there young people? Are there kids leading, right? Because that matters. Representation matters. When you're singing hymns, are we singing things that might be inclusive to people? Pay attention to the words that you're singing. Don't just sing a hymn because you like the tune, but what's the message? What's the message that's being sent, right? When you're thinking about welcome, how do we make sure that the whole environment is safe? Is that helpful? Yeah. Oh, wait, I think I just turned it off, sorry. There you go.
Can you talk about the difference between identity and culture and maybe the pros and cons of linking those two? So I think of,
Yeah, say more.
for example, earlier we heard about questions around a subculture of, you know, I don't remember what, but maybe the queer community. But is there a risk of generalizing a definition of cultural attributes to a group that identifies or someone that identifies a certain way? So to me, there's a difference between culture and identity, right? Like, or should we see those as the same thing? Do you follow
Yeah.
me?
I would say they're very closely linked, because how you identify is a part of your culture too.
Right.
Yeah.
I've also encountered times where someone has identified a certain way, but they don't appreciate maybe the assumption that carries a certain set of attributes
Sure.
or desires or viewpoints or values or whatever, right? So it goes both ways.
Yeah, so just because somebody identifies a certain way doesn't mean that all people who identify that way are similar, right? Maybe that's what you're
Right,
getting at. Like,
right.
you can't just make assumptions about somebody walks in the door, identifies a certain way, and you think, oh, I know who you are. No, maybe some, right? maybe you've learned there's some things that apply to people, and maybe in general you could say, hey, if somebody walks in and identifies as trans, you might say, hey, we have a bathroom that's non-gendered. That might be helpful for you, right? That might be helpful, but there, I think, is when Pastor Jason, it's okay to step in it sometimes, right? And say, hey, okay, you're Puerto Rican. Does that mean you celebrate Three Kings Day? I would say yes, but not everyone does. That was January 6th, Three Kings Day. That's our high holy day. Like Christmas happens, but then on January 6th is the big day when all family gets together and we share presents. And so my family just left this morning, actually. They were all up here. But I think it's important to learn. That's where learning is important. And always ask. Don't make assumptions. Let people tell you who they are and what's important about their history, heritage. Because even for some people, just because they identify them some way doesn't mean they're proud of it. Doesn't mean they like it. Doesn't mean they want it to be public. So sometimes, it's important to be curious. And if somebody doesn't want to talk about it, let them not talk about it. Because sometimes, as a person who's other, you always have to explain why. You always have to explain why you're different and why this and that. And you don't want to always have to be explaining yourself, right? And so it's a dance. It's a dance.
The second part of my thought process was, okay, first about individuals and groups, and then about a congregation, because we're talking about kind of a cultural context for worship.
Mm-hmm.
So do you see congregations also having to kind of define their identity, or their cultural norms is also their congregational identity, right? Like it's like, oh, well, we're this way.
Yep.
So
but
we may have fluidity there too.
Right? And so you might have to figure out, wait a minute, maybe we think we're all a particular way, but maybe we are not. I went to Luther College. And at Luther College, right, old Norwegian institution, and I was a singer there, and being in choir, they would say, oh, okay, well, we're going to sing this song, and there's some syncopation. I know it's going to be difficult because we're all Norwegians here. I'm like, no, we're not. Even one time, he looked at me, he was like, Rosas, and I'm like, no, that's the other brown kid. Like, oh, sorry, I get you guys mixed up. Like, really? That's reality in the world. But you're right, it's one of the important things to remember about cultures that they're not all monolithic, right? Including congregations. Congregations are not monolithic. It's not a culture, but organisms are different. So sometimes, even though individuals might have different cultures, different stories that they bring to this one place, you do create a certain cultural body together that is different and distinct. And so you might behave and choose to behave and live in a certain way here as a congregation that you may not elsewhere, right? That you might identify with certain things here. And that's part of a communal discernment, which you have been doing, right? That's why you're focusing on welcome all right now, right? This is part of developing of who we are as a community. This is our culture. We're going to figure out a way to welcome all, to love all. What was the other one? I can't remember. There's one other one. But this is you serve. There you go, serve all. Yeah. So this is how you develop your own culture. So in some ways, when congregations develop their mission and vision and values, it's a way for a congregation to say, this is the culture we're trying to create in this space. And so if your mission and vision, right, is to welcome all, to love all, to serve all, you might say, okay, how do we make sure that in our worship, we're welcoming all, loving all, serving all in the way we preach, in the way we teach, in the way we sing, in the way we pass the peace, and the way we collect offerings, and the way we make communion accessible, and even to think about the space, are pews good? Are they not? Is there room here for kids? Where can kids go? Is there room for kids in worship? Are they expected to leave worship? I mean, those are all questions to ask, right? Although I have learned actually pews are great for kids because you can just schlep stuff in and you just box them in as opposed to chairs. It's hard to contain a kid on a chair. Pews are actually great for families. Other thoughts, questions, comments? think I have 3 minutes. Yes, hold on.
So I was just going to add that the church that I belonged to in Southern California prior to coming here was bilingual, Hispanic and English speaking. Although there was the English speaking congregation and there was the Hispanic speaking congregation. And we met and had bilingual services, probably like once a month or every 6 weeks or so, which takes a long time, by the way. It was such a valuable experience I learned so much more about cultural differences. And then there was a church that shared our church, that also worshiped at the same time, and they were totally different. Hispanic, the pastor would preach for an hour, very not Lutheran, and their music and everything was totally different. And we, one time, tried to combine our Lutheran service with theirs, come together for a worship service. It didn't work out as well.
It's messy.
It was, crossing that cultural difference did not work as well. But it was an extremely valuable experience, and it's a long story, but yeah, it was good.
Do you have something you want to add? No? Oh, I thought maybe you were. Okay. Any last thoughts, questions, comments?
As a congregation, in making this decision to accept this idea, which I do open, but it makes me really sad when I see certain people leave. How are we supposed to reflect on that? Or what can we do when we see this person on the street that left us? I just don't know what to say. Sometimes I'm bold and I'll say, I'm sorry that you're not worshiping with us. And say, why? And I've gotten, different answers. And I don't really want to talk about that part, but I want to know how I should feel. I feel like I don't want to pass judgment on them, and that's hard for me.
I'll say that again for the recording. So as we were figuring out, do we become a Reconciling in Christ congregation, you see there's been some people who have left, and there will be maybe more people who might leave after you make it more formalized. What do you do with those folks who maybe you love, you see out on the street, you see them at the grocery store? What do you do with those relationships after they've gone? And I would say you continue to say what you did. Say, I miss you. I love you. And that's open. I think that's important. Say, I miss you and I love you. But here's another important thing. As you're creating a welcoming community, you might be a welcoming community for everyone. You're trying to be a community that's welcoming for everyone. But that means that everyone in the room needs to be willing to be a part of that mission. And if somebody is not willing to be a part of the mission of being welcoming for everyone, or at least being in process of getting to where they might be welcoming for everyone, then maybe you're not welcome in this community. And that's okay, right? I mean, God exists in many places. There's lots of different congregations. There's places where you can go where they will say, yeah, there isn't room here for people who love someone of the same gender. And they can be supportive for one another. They can meet God there too, and God can keep on working with them. But the culture you're trying to create, if you're trying to say everyone here needs to be open to the idea that we're welcoming everyone, and that needs to be a non-negotiable. Because if you negotiate on that, then you can't do it. Then you can't be welcoming to everyone. So everyone needs to say yes to that. And that's why you go through this discernment process, to make sure that everyone who's here, who's going to be a part of this community, who's going to say we're going to be a welcoming community, is either there or willing to be on the journey. One of my favorite comments from a congregation that I was working with, they were in Rochester, Minnesota. There was a woman who was totally against. She was like, I don't think that God wanted us to live this way. I can't understand why somebody would be in a same-sex committed relationship. I will never condone it. I just can't. And I love this community. And I love this community more than that one belief. And so I'm committed to this community. And even though it makes me uncomfortable, I know this community is trying to make that work. So I'm going to be committed to staying uncomfortable. That to me was beautiful. Like, I don't need to change who you are, but if you're willing to say, I'm willing to stay uncomfortable because I love this community, great. Great. Yeah.
And hopefully the community has the same primary goals and doesn't drive that individual away.
Right. Right. Which, as far as I know, she stayed there as long as I know. Yeah. Because the people will be different, people will disagree, but as long as you're committed to the same mission, it's okay to be uncomfortable, right? And hopefully we can love each other across difference, and that's really the biggest goal. So you just keep saying it, keep saying, hey, I miss you, hey, I love you, come be uncomfortable with us. Yeah.
As long as that person doesn't transfer the uncomfortableness to the queer individual,
Right.
as long as they don't project.
That's right. Because a community needs to hold each other accountable. I mean, if you're going to be a welcoming place, if you hear somebody say something that's demeaning, degrading, dehumanizing, you have to say something about it. You cannot let it slide. Otherwise, you're not doing your work. That's exactly right. Yes, Michelle?
As an old woman, white woman, you know, been straight my whole life, I think what a lot of people my age, I'm 62, is we don't understand things, so then we're uncomfortable with it. And what I learned years ago is I don't have to understand it to love the person who feels different than I do, and I love them because God loves them. And that's what I've come to understand. Just because I don't understand doesn't mean that it's wrong.
I just wanted to share from my perspective. I grew up Methodist. My mom still worships at the church I was kind of confirmed in. You may not be aware the Methodist Church around the world did not go through the same schism that the Lutheran Church did, right? When I wasn't here at that time, but when many of your parishioners moved down the street, right? The Methodist Church is still trying to hold that together. They're trying to placate both sides, and it's not working well, from my perspective. So it's not ideal, but I think it's okay to let some people decide that they're not comfortable with the decisions we're making, and they can go their own way and worship in their own way for now. And it makes, I think, us stronger. And certainly it seems like the National Lutheran leadership is much more functional now than the Methodist worldwide organization appears to be. So yes, we will probably lose people. I think maybe in the long run that's okay. It doesn't mean we don't love them still, but they can choose to worship how they choose to worship.
Good conversation. Well, I think we're at time. I'm not sure what's next. Do you know? Is this it? You're just kind of done? Okay, this is it. Well, I'll just say thank you. Thank you for the conversation, for listening. And yeah. Okay. Sure. 73. I was in Elroy this morning. Yeah. Yeah, so the question for those who want to, so just a side question, I'm busy. How do I get around to all the congregations? I'm at a different congregation every morning, every Sunday, pretty much. Yeah. And then when there's special things, you know, anniversaries or installations or ordinations, those type of things, I try to wiggle things around so I can do those things as well. But then oftentimes it's maybe 2 churches on a Sunday. And 73 is small, actually. This synod is small compared to most. Yeah. I think, and we're compact. I mean, I can drive to any congregation in an hour and a half, where some, they have multiple states. They have to fly to get out to everywhere. So I'm lucky, actually, because I get to be in 2 congregations today and get home and be with my 2 boys tonight. So that's a blessing for sure. Yeah. Well, I'll just leave you with a blessing. Here's a cross-cultural moment for me. So, right, I'll use this. The transcultural piece is that we do blessings, right? People have done blessings for a long, long time. We do weddings. We've been doing weddings for a long, long time. Well, one of my friends asked me to do a wedding down at Middle Coon Valley, actually. And so I was living in Texas at the time, so I flew up, did the wedding, and I flew out because I had another event to go to. I was busy then, too. But one of the things they wanted is that their heritage was Irish, and so they wanted this Irish blessing. May the road rise up to meet you. And so I figured out a way to sing that blessing for them, and then I've been like doing it ever since. I do it at weddings and baptisms and funerals, and so I'll sing this blessing for you, right? So it kind of pulls together all this. It was contextual, cross-cultural, even countercultural in the way that it's a blessing for people, right? And so a blessing for you as you're on this journey, because it's a blessing meant for those who are on a journey. So as you're on this journey, figuring out how do we become this welcoming community, a blessing for you. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Amen. Thank you all.